Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Pop Screen, the Geek Show podcast about the good, the bad, and the befuddling of movies, either starring, by, or about pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a filmmaker and a critic for the Geek Show and Horrified, the British horror website, and I can be found on Letterboxd at Graham Williamson. I'm joined this week by
Mark Cunliffe. I'm also at the Geek Show, and we are Cult, and I can also be found on Letterboxd. Just look for Mark Cunliffe. And what else have I done? Write for Arrow Film, Arrow Academy, Arrow Video, and I've got a chapter in Scarred for Life, Volume 2.
Indeed. This week, listeners, Mark and I are checking our privilege, specifically our BFI Flipside Blu-ray of Privilege by Peter Watkins, a film that came out in 1967 and has had its cult kept alive by a dedicated band of followers who were not put off by the fact that the film was so obscure that at one point Watkins complained that Universal Studios would not let him have a copy of his own film. Not a 35mm like print that could be screened, not that kind of copy. He just wanted a VHS of it.
Wow.
And they wouldn't even give him that.
Unbelievable.
It would be fair to say that Watkins has had a tricky career, wouldn't it?
Oh, definitely, yeah. But to actually like go cap in hand for your own,
Yeah.
your own body of work is strange, wasn't it? It's a bit like Peter Cook and Dudley Moore, isn't it? When they got wind of the junking of stuff in the 70s,
yes.
when they learned that not only but also much of it was slated to be wiped. I think Peter Cook did actually say, well, just give me the discs then.
Yeah.
No, we can't do that. It's BBC property.
Incredible.
Well, can you not sort of transfer it across to one of these newfangled VHS tapes? No, can't do that either.
And yet, if any YouTuber has published a book, they have like at least a 10 deep stack of unsold copies of it behind them in every video.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just checking if we've got any books.
When I publish something, I promise you, I will have that stack in the background.
We're just missing that, aren't we? That's what we need. We're just teetering upwards there like that.
Yeah, Watkins was doing this off the back of a couple of projects that had not gone well. I mean, one of them famously was The War Game, which got made and is great, and then got banned in perhaps the most spectacular circumstances that any British television broadcast has got banned, in my opinion. Which is that Harold Wilson watched it and said, Jesus Christ, there's no way you're putting that out.
Is that exactly what he said, though?
I would like to think so.
I'd like that.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, Mary, come and have a look at this. Flat horses. Harold Wilson impressions, kids. That's what you come here for, isn't it?
It's good. Now John Sessions has left us, it's good that someone can keep that afloat.
No, because I'll start doing Stella Street impressions now. I tend to happen about 8. I open in G.
It's weird how much influence Stella Street still has. Like,
brilliant show.
Yeah, whenever I think of Dirk Bogarts, I should think of Death in Venice. I should think of Victim. What I actually think of is John Sessions going, I thought your mother said she enjoyed the gambling ambiance.
And mine is when he goes to complain to Mick and Keith that he's not got the lady, he's got mojo. Mojo. Keith's going, it's the distributors. It's not our fault, it's the distributors.
Sessions as Keith Richards is a work of art. It's like Phil Cornwell's Boy. It's one of those impersonations that everyone does, but they just made it their own.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, yeah. We've already gone off on a tangent, haven't we?
Wildly, yes.
But it's music. It's pop music. It's rock music. It's the 60s, and that's kind of where we're at here with Privilege.
To drag it back, I think that when Universal Studios hired Watkins to make a film about rock music starring Paul Jones from Manfred Mann, they were probably expecting something a bit more like a bunch of rock stars live on a suburban street rather than what they got.
Yeah, I don't really know the background of this film very well, only that it's from a story by Johnny Speight, who of course wrote Till Death Us Do Part and Later in Sickness and Health, and a really intriguing play called, which the ITV did twice, once in the 60s and once again in the 70s, called If There Weren't Any Blacks, You'd Have to Invent Them.
I was hoping you'd mention If There Weren't Any Blacks, You'd Have to Invent Them. People do not know about that, and it is very, very eerie. It's the sort of thing where, I mean, occasionally there is still a debate, a silly debate, in my opinion, about how much Till Death Us Do Part was a satire of bigotry or an example of it. And I think once you've seen where Speight is coming from in that play, you realise exactly what his politics were.
Yeah, I mean, and also this film as well, you can see they're just mounting piles of evidence that immediately crushes any of those idiots who go, oh, you can't put out on the telly these days, the woke brigade won't have it, or, you know, that kind of. But hey, you could call people anything you wanted. Now we were all having a laugh at each other, you know, that crap.
Back in the good old days, of course, Peter Watkins had to fight tooth and nail to get stuff like this put out. The J. Arthur Rank organisation, who before they became rhyming slang, were the webcam is slightly too low res for that. It just looked like a hummingbird flew past the camera. Yeah, that's it. Oh, seductive. Yeah, that's.
This is crap for the audio only.
Yeah,
isn't it?
But gold if you're watching on video, obviously.
Could be more gold if we put it out on Patreon as well.
Blimey, I don't want to think what you'd have for the Patreon listeners. We haven't got an OnlyFans yet. Maybe this would be the ideal time to launch it.
Now you're talking.
But yes, the J. Arthur Rank organisation, back when they were one of Britain's largest cinema chains, refused to show this film on account of, and I quote, its immoral nature.
Really?
That's it. That was the reason.
What is there that's remotely immoral about this film?
Well, this is the thing with Watkins. I mean, you look at his career, and it is the worst case scenario for a political filmmaker. It's very easy, and I know we have both done it many times, often on this show, to look back at British film and television of the 60s and 70s and go, oh, they had Ken Loach, they had Ken Russell, they had Alan Clark. What a golden age. You could do anything. But you've still got someone like Watkins who tried to do radical things and just hit wall after wall after wall.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I mean, it's not even like he's the enfant terrible of this sort of movement, really. He's not Ken Russell, you know. He's just a very good, interesting filmmaker who picks topics that were perhaps just no-go areas at the time. You know, nuclear war at the time of the Cold War it's always going to be a hard sell, really,
Yeah.
isn't it? But yeah, it's strange because, and it probably explains why he's still quite little known, really.
Yeah, because after this, he did 2 films with Universal. He did this and another science fiction feature called The Gladiators. And I think he only had one more film in America, which was the very famous Punishment Park.
Punishment Park, brilliant film.
He only did that before he became more of an international director. And some of his European films are great. I am a huge fan of Edvard Munch. I think that's one of the great films about art history.
Yeah.
But it's 4.5 hours long, and that's not his longest film by any means. So it's like,
you watch that, I'll watch Monk, the detective with OCD instead.
and you'll probably get finished first, won't you?
Probably will, yeah. And that seemed to go on forever, but yeah.
So
yeah, I must admit, it's only
difficult
really
director.
yes, yeah, but I must admit, it's only really his early work that I know of, really. I think anything after Punishment Park, I genuinely don't think I've seen. Nothing's jumping to my mind that I may have seen after Punishment Park, really.
I don't want to get bogged down in the Edvard Munch film because I could talk about it all day, but there is one bit in it that I think is illustrative of why Watkins fought for this approach to filmmaking and what the use of it is. Because you know how every single biopic about a groundbreaking artist, doesn't matter whether it's Picasso, Stravinsky, anyone, there's always a bit which is the worst bit in the film without fail, where some snobby art critic looks down his pince-nez at Les Demoiselles d'Avignon and goes, "Her eyes are on the wrong side of her face. You'll never sell this, Pablo." And it's rubbish. It's so shit.
Yeah.
But Watkins works in this sort of mock documentary way, and he likes to cast amateurs. And for the Edvard Munch film, he simply cast real life Norwegians who hated Edvard Munch's paintings, and he put them in period costume, and he got them to look at the camera and explain exactly what it was that they hated about these paintings. And so the scene is completely believable in a way that no other artistic biopic can match.
Because you're getting honest reactions as opposed to scripted cliches. Yeah. And I think that there is an element of always going for the honest reaction that's sort of a thread that runs through his work, perhaps, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nothing feels... I don't think we call it social realism. I don't think... Because it deals in...
kind of Brechtian realism, isn't it? You're meant to think that it's real, but you're not meant to think it's like a window into another room, as you are with the sort of Loach Lee kind of social realism. You're meant to be very aware of the artifice of it.
Yeah, but at the same time, the very recognizable characters, it's amateur acting, the using amateurs rather than professional actors. Even this, I mean, you've got... It's a strange sort of cast, isn't it? You've got Paul Jones singing with Manfred Mann, who did go on to be a bit of an actor, didn't he? But I think this might have been his first role, perhaps. So he was quite untested. And then, common consensus would prevail that you've got an untested, unknown quantity as your leading man. His leading lady, therefore, should be somebody with a bit of chops around, and maybe you get Vanessa Redgrave or somebody like that. Yeah. Charlotte Rampling. No, Jean Shrimpton.
Yes.
Sweet Jean Shrimpton.
The shrimp, the most glamorous person ever to be named after an unimpressive sea crustacean. There is a lovely sentence in Roger Ebert's review of this from when it came out, where he says that Shrimpton had, and I quote, "something of Julie Christie in her performance. Not much, but something."
It's an indie, but again, it's it's real. It's a real performance, because it's like you say, they've gone to somebody and said, you act as authentically as you can to that. And she doesn't seem to be acting. And I don't think it's that she doesn't seem to be acting because she can't act. It's just there's something very naive about her and authentic about her screen persona that makes it quite an interesting concept. But a wild choice, really, to put two unknown quantities, I should say.
Yes, unknown as actors.
As actors, yeah. In a film, when you hope that your film would be a bankable project.
Well, I suppose I can see where Watkins and Universal are kind of at cross purposes here, because Watkins is, as we say, doing his usual thing of trying to make the film appear more real by casting people who really have these opinions, who really do this work, make everything as close to the character as possible. Whereas from Universal's standpoint, what he's doing is casting a rock star as a rock star, which, is also risky, but it's much more commercial. It has a very good commercial track record, even as early as 1969, rather. Yeah.
And it's like you say, they probably expected another Hard Day's Night or something like that. The same way that a couple of years later, Performance, this will just be a fun little romp with the Rolling Stones in.
I imagine that, with no disrespect to Johnny Speight, who, I've made it clear how much I admire him, but I suspect that before Watkins started reassembling this script to fit his usual sort of faux documentary style, I imagine this was a slightly more brightly coloured, digestible kind of satire. It was something that you could watch and not feel implicated, I guess.
Yeah, because it's a film that very much points the finger at everybody, doesn't it? We are all sort of involved in this, even if your only culpability is that you're a sheep. We're all complicit in some way or another in building this this performer up to the status and ranks that he becomes. I could imagine Speight's is a little bit more satirical, anarchic, comedic.
More of a sort of entertainment kind of satire rather than a really lacerating thing, perhaps. Yeah.
It would be... The only thing, I watched it again the other day, and the only thing that kept coming back to me as I was watching it was it's almost like a sort of lost sibling to V for Vendetta.
That's good. Yes,
it's the same kind of world that it inhabits, isn't it? By that I mean more of Alan Moore's actual graphic novel, not the not too bad film version, but
I watched it.
Great,
I rewatched that recently for an episode of our sister show Behold, and it angered me much less than I remembered. It's got some good stuff in.
Yeah, I mean, they're hard to do, aren't they? But I mean, but of that, it feels very much of that Britain.
Yeah,
the sort of England prevails sign off that you hear in V for Vendetta. You could imagine that being spoken at any minute in this film.
We should,
even down to the whole the weird kind of there's a bit where they say Stephen's Mind Palace, is it called, or something Palace, which is like just a consumer world of things that he is sort of like advertising.
Yes.
And shoppers go there, and they're all British made products because it's you're trying to boost British economy, which isn't a million miles away from what they were doing at the time with I'm Back in Britain. So there is that satire of it again.
We should explain a little of the world that Stephen Chaucer, the character that Paul Jones plays, is inhabiting here, because we see him in a scene which gives you very little impression of how this world is different. He is introduced in this ticker tape parade, and the voiceover, which, as usual in Watkins' films, is done by Watkins, just reels off this list of absolutely astonishing success he's had. He advertises everything. He's the biggest pop star in the world. He has, contacts and fans everywhere. He's like all of the Beatles rolled into one. And then you start to see some of the things that he actually does. And that, I think, the first glimpse we see of him after that ticker tape parade, the first glimpse we see of his actual work is that concert he does where he's singing "Set Me Free." Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And see, I'd forgot, because it's been about 10 years since I last watched this, and I forgot that he was supposed to be a Rolling Stones type bad boy at the start of the film, for want of a better word. Because it's funny, as I put it on and watching it, and you're seeing him on that presidential style ticker tape parade, and he's waving to people. You think, I remembered where the film goes. I'm thinking, yes, Paul Jones is perfect casting, because there's nothing sexual about him. Not that he's not a good looking man or anything like that, but you never got that.
There's nothing sort of feral about him in the way that Jagger is, isn't it?
Yeah. There's no. So I thought, yes, that's perfect casting, and you can see why he's sort of like a soldier of Christ in pop form, because he's got that angelic kind of look, and he's very asexual. He's not intimidating or threatening. You would let your daughter go out with Paul Jones,
Yes.
And then it did a complete 360 on me by saying that he's been imprisoned, and they never explain what that prison sentence was, but then they sort of reenact it in the concert, don't they? So it's sort of like, it's almost as if, do you remember that dreadful Plan B, the defamation of Strickland Banks?
Oh,
it's
yes,
like a concept album about a rapper who goes to prison or something like that.
Yeah.
It's almost as if it's that, but in concert form. But rather than being some fat cockney pretending to have had that life, we're actually supposed to believe that the character of Stephen Shorter has had that life, and now he's replicating it for entertainment purposes.
You've said something there that I've seen this film a couple of times now, and it hasn't quite clicked with me yet. But you're right; you never find out what Shorter went to prison for, and I'm wondering now, after you've said it, whether it's meant to be a kind of a, is it part of the subterfuge? Was he sent to prison to build up his bad boy credentials, so that when he became a propaganda artist, everyone will think, oh, well, it can't be propaganda. It's coming from the bad boy, Stephen Shorter, the anti-establishment guy.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I hadn't thought of that, actually, but yeah, that's very interesting, isn't it? Because you do kind of think it could just be a made-up backstory that sort of attracts the populace to him.
Because
it's clearly taken its cues from the Stones, isn't it? Whether it's either the drug bust or just pissing it outside a garage in Cheshire or whatever it was they were doing for. It's clearly something that suggests that kind of bad boy image. But yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting.
And it is very interesting that, as you say, that they choose this pop star who has a sort of rebellious image, because even back in the 60s, when rock and roll was still a thing that annoyed your parents, you still had people like Pat Boone and Cliff Richard who had a more sort of conformist, conservative kind of angle to their work. Stephen Shorter could have been one of them.
Absolutely. This is clear. I mean, if we went back to what Speight's original vision might have been, it's clearly a piss take of Cliff Richard, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like Cliff Richard's the Christian pop star. If the government, interestingly, a coalition government, which when I watched it back in 2011, 2012. That was shit. You know,
Yes.
we've got one of those.
Rather like, I think the moment, around the same time, I rewatched Terry Gilliam's Brazil, and I had never paid as much attention to the fact that the government in Brazil have the slogan, "We're all in this together."
Yeah, that is spooky,
Yikes.
isn't it? Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say now, but yeah, the
coalition government.
Yeah,
they end up...
I'm sort of branching off into two here that I shouldn't be doing. I should stick on one furrow and stay with it, but I won't, and I'll get confused. So bear with me. But the government have, and with the church have seized upon Stephen and said, right, this is going to be our figurehead, our emblematic thing to quell and control the population and their interests and their the pound in their pocket and all that kind of stuff. Because everything is just, he's a singer, he's a idol, he's a figure to look up to, a role model. He's selling things, so it's all in one, isn't it? So that's the way they control him. But it's a coalition government, which struck me as odd at the time when I first watched it.
Yeah.
Now we don't have a coalition government, but the interesting thing is it says that the coalition was formed because there was no longer any recognisable difference between the Tories and the Labour Party. And Christ, we've got that with Keir Starmer, haven't we?
When I rewatched it, I actually noted that. I was going to note that down, and I thought, no, I bet Mark will notice that, actually. I don't think
I bet the raving communist is going to say something about this, isn't it?
But it's true. It's uncanny in that way. And I think when that line comes in, it's very interesting, because that line comes in at the point where he has this big rally in a sports stadium with lots of, it's his most explicitly Christian performance, but it's also got a lot of kind of Leni Riefenstahl style.
Very much so, yeah, because they're all doing the salute. They've got the Union Jack armbands, haven't they, which are worryingly suggestive of
but it's interesting that.
Burning crosses as well.
Oh, they do. They have burning crosses, yeah. But that's interesting. That's an interesting thing, because it's the first thing that they do that is overtly dystopian, in the sense of this is not something that is happening in 1960s Britain. For the preceding hour or so of the film, all of this massive propaganda power and massive government power is dedicated towards just keeping society as it was.
Yeah,
which is an interesting and kind of, it's a subtle distinction, isn't it? I think people can find dystopias very easy to shrug off if it's like, a sinister world where everyone with brown eyes is sent to a re-education camp or some bollocks. But when you have this absolutely despotic power geared towards just making things a bit cozy and safe and old-time British,
they just want you to buy the same tin of beans that you've bought for the past 20 years. There's something quite eerie about that, isn't it?
Definitely,
Or maybe just buy another and buy 2 tins of the same beans, not just one. Just to keep everything going. It's low key, but it's unsettlingly low key, isn't it? But I think you've hit the nail on the head there when you say that's when it gets very dystopic, and you realize, we're not. We are just moments into the future, perhaps. We are witnessing the slide of fascism, as opposed to being in some sort of slightly alternate 1967 or something. And that's where I think you've hit there when you said about what's the difference between what Watkins did when he took over the story to as opposed to what Speight did. Because I think Speight is very much mocking the sort of proto-Simon Cowell media manipulation thing, but at the same time taking pot shots at his favourites, the church, the government. I don't think he'd have gone to that dystopic vision in the same way that Watkins did.
If he did, I bet Speight would have done it much earlier and had the whole thing be slightly removed from reality. I think
Yeah,
for all of Speight's ingenuity, I don't think he would look at like 1960s consumer society and think this is a form of fascism. But that
yeah.
absolutely is Watkins' kind of
Watkins is
worldview.
yeah. But one of the things that watching it back that jumps out to me, I think, yeah, that's Spate is the sort of, for want of a better word, popping up of traditional hymns like
Yes.
Onward Christian Soldiers and Jerusalem.
I
But
mean,
Onward Christian Soldiers in particular, with them dressed as monks playing there and having the various members of the church sort of like nodding their heads to it and others being a bit appalled by it as well. That seems to be quite Spate.
yeah, definitely. And I think when we talk about privilege as a satire that implicates you, one of the things that I find most disturbing is that Mersey beat version of Onward Christian Soldiers fucking bangs. I
Isn't
love
it
that
brilliant?
song.
Isn't it brilliant? I'll be honest. Like I say, I watched it again yesterday and it's been in my head for
Yeah.
like 24 hours now. Onward Christian
Christian, ding, ding, ding,
soldiers. It's brilliant. It's
It's so
so
good.
yeah,
Yeah.
it really is.
I, the music of Privilege has a bit more of an afterlife than you'd expect for a film that was essentially buried, because that song that Paul Jones sings at the start, Set Me Free, was covered by Patti Smith on her album Easter.
Did not know that.
There is a
Ah.
very good liner note that she wrote in the album, which I think is remarkably insightful and very poetic. But she wrote, this is the title track from the John Heyman, Peter Watkins production of the film Privilege, a movie that merged the rock martyr Paul Jones with all the sacristal images of the 60s, the cross, the Christ, the whip and the lashes that served to veil velvet weeping balls the eyes of Gene Shrimpton.
Wow. Yeah, that is a good liner note.
That makes you feel kind of redundant as a reviewer, really,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Bye. Thanks for joining us. Yeah. I think that says it all, really, doesn't it? Yeah. It's I can't follow that. No.
There is this element of poetry in the film, and I think there is one of the reasons why I think if it was given a chance, this might have had an audience outside of Watkins' usual admirers, is that the love story between Jones and Gene Shrimpton, for all their limitations as actors, it does feel like it has a kind of tragic quality.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's yeah, they're just very believable.
Mm.
And okay, we know, as I'm sure we've discussed before on this podcast, and you've certainly discussed with other co-hosts as well, and guests, is that it's hard. You know, it's difficult for a pop star to suddenly say, right now, emote. You know,
Yeah.
emote in a way that isn't just standing on stage going, or pleading into the microphone, to actually emote in a sort of recognizable manner that won't come off eggy or wooden or anything like that. It is difficult, and Paul Jones makes a good fist of it. Really, I mean, I don't think I'm ever aware of. I don't think I'm ever unaware of the fact that he's a singer and a musician. Acting as opposed to an actor who will sing, but he's got the hardest role, really, because he's got to be he's the one who's got to say what's going on and what depths of despair his character is plummeting to, whereas she's got to just react to them, which she does very well. As I say, there's a naivety to the way she does it, but you always get the feeling that she does care for him and she does want to help him. she just gets, she gets to stand there and look stunned and teary, as opposed to having to actually vocalize the pain that the character's feeling, which is his job.
And they got some very sniffy reviews at the time, but I think ultimately when Jones is inarticulate, it's when the character is inarticulate, and when Shrimpton is kind of blank and vacant, it's because the character is kind of blank and vacant. And it's like,
I mean, the gauche presences, but
yeah,
the gauche characters.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't cast her to play Hedda Gabler, but I think everything she does in here is both intentional and correct.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Shorter is a character by his very definition who's supposed to be inarticulate. He's got a skill, he can sing, but other than that, he's a lump of clay that's being manipulated by other people. I mean, there's nothing there to him, isn't it? He is the blank canvas that other people paint upon. I mean, Jean Shrimpton's character's painting becomes this blank canvas almost. It's just, there's no features when she's painting him, is there? Because she doesn't see a person there at first. And there's a great introductory shot where it's not long, it's either just before the concert footage where he's singing Set Me Free, or it's after the concert footage, and they're all sat around at some sort of I think it's Uncle Julie's birthday party, is it? Uncle Julie, we've got to be very careful with, because there'd be calls for, if you try to make that character now, then you're going to get labelled an anti-Semitic, aren't you?
Do you know where Uncle Jubilee came from? There is actually a story behind this guy. They watched a documentary called Lonely Boy about Paul Anka. And he really did have an Uncle Julie. He's one of those, I mean, he is one of the showbiz types that you see in a lot of rock movies. There's a character in Espresso Bongo who's exactly the kind of Jewish wheeler dealer with a sentimental streak who loves his old mum. As you say, he was very close to the wind in some points.
You couldn't do it now. You definitely could not do it now. Yeah, I think it's supposed to be his birthday party, is it? And they're all sat around at a table, and they pick a picture up of Stephen, and as they lift the picture up, the glare of the lights hit his face, the picture's the face of him on the picture.
Yeah.
And so at that precise moment, all you see is a body and a sort of white orb. And again, that just strikes me straight away as like, this is a man who is just nothing, he only exists from what those people are creating him and presenting him to be. And then the orb, sort of the picture moves a bit and the orb goes away. And you see like Uncle Julie, I think it is, smiling, happy, whatever, and he looks visibly pained. As a character, he's sort of like, he doesn't know how to, and that thread follows through. There's a lot of the big blown up pictures of him at the concerts and in the is it a Dream Palace?
Yes, Dream Palace.
Something like that, isn't
Mind Palace is
it's when, Sherlock, isn't it? Yeah.
when they have a bit where Benedict Cumberbatch has to think, so he just like flicks his hands around like he's Spider-Man or something.
I'm just doing that again. J. Arthur Rank.
What a weird creative decision that was.
It's like, hey, Sherlock Holmes been existing for centuries. What should we do? Oh, we'll start saying he's got a mind palace. But I can go on for ages slagging off Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss, so I'll try not to do that. But yeah, in the Dream Palace, these big blown up pictures of him, there's always something slightly awry in how he looks. It's almost like it's like, when you used to see those like at the time of the Gulf War, when they put like captured soldiers on television and they were blinking, and the blinks are SOS signals. There's something there. It's very much, it is free me. It's very much like set me free, get me, but in the only way he knows how. There's something always pained in every single photograph of him, which you don't see in rock stars' photos, do you?
It reminds me a bit of you saw that Asif Kapadia documentary about Diego Maradona.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you not think that no matter what age he was, every time he was in a crowd or in a public appearance, there was always a terror in his
Looks
eyes?
utterly terrified, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He really does. Yeah, that is true. For a man who was loved by millions and seemed to court a lot of that love
You
as
definitely
well.
never thought of him as an unconfident man. I certainly
No.
didn't until I
And
saw that
then,
film.
yeah, it's like you say, the crowd around me's like,
Yeah.
it's a look of sheer rabbit in the headlights terror, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those pictures aren't quite as intense as that, but it's one of those that I think what Watkins tries to get us to do is say, right, because they're not always touched upon. I mean, you could, I mean, I know one of my pictures here has got a white orb there like that. You could see that, then the frame moves, and you just go, oh, okay, it's just trick of the light sort of thing. But then it's asking you to sort of consider it, and maybe you won't get it there in that first instant. Maybe it's the second watch of the film, but you do start to notice the little things that are awry in the way that he is sort of preserved in aspic in
Yeah.
those photographs, presenting a different side of his character each time. And in each one, he's uncomfortable.
And I think that is one of Watkins' great strengths. That when you say he is a guy who makes fake documentaries and fake newsreel, you might think that his work is very crude in the way that found footage horror movies are often visually very crude, but that's not the case at all. I think he has always displayed a real precision to his image making, and he has very strong opinions about what cinema should be. I mean, he has this idea of the monoform, which is that every TV series and every film that he sees is designed to distract and break thought with fast editing and loud music, and he's clearly thinking, because this is before MTV that he's saying this. He's clearly thinking about the rock movies that Privilege was released at the same time as. So part of the reason why he ends up doing like 8-hour documentaries on the Paris Commune, it's not just self-indulgence. He genuinely thinks that in order to make a film about something radical, you have to make something that rejects as much of commercial cinema as possible.
Yeah. And I think he's somebody who's got, I mean, it's a word that gets bandied about, but visionary, because the pure essence of visionary is it's someone with a vision. And he's definitely got that. I mean, we mentioned V for Vendetta, Alan Moore, and how you could imagine this either being an influence on what Alan Moore has written, or sharing the same world as that. Absolutely sharing the same universe as that story. And that's because I imagine he has, when he's creating a story, he follows a similar thought pattern or work ethic that somebody like Alan Moore might do. I can't imagine he just goes, right, this is a film about a pop star who is being manipulated by the government, so here we go. I imagine he's understood. I imagine he's created a valid backstory, a reason, an understanding, a past, a present, and a future about every single thing in that film that we might never see, and it's just 90 minutes long or whatever. So you're never going to see all of that, but it's there in his head as he's making it. The same as Punishment Park. I think there's a whole history, and we might only be seeing, in the case of this film, we might only be seeing Birmingham and London, perhaps. But I imagine he could probably tell you what was going on in Liverpool, what was going on in Glasgow, what was going on in Land's End at exactly those same points as well, because he's very much somebody who just understands the whole landscape of what he's creating.
And I think this is one of the reasons why he keeps coming back to this mock documentary form, where one of the things that changes about storytelling when you're working in this style is that you don't necessarily have to set things up in the way that a traditional narrative film does. You don't have to start your story at the point where the trouble begins. You don't have to do all of these things. You can pitch your audience into the middle of a situation, as he does here, and say, right, keep up. Look at what's going on around you and work it out.
Yeah, and the voiceovers help. The voiceovers are I mean, people criticize voiceovers an awful lot in films, and with valid reason, because the voiceover is usually a good example of something got fucked up in the edit. Let's shove a voiceover on it, or a sign of indulgence, like Quentin Tarantino. Here's a 16-hour Hateful Eight. It felt like 16 hours. Suddenly, 14 hours in, I'll just throw a voiceover on top of it. Why? These choices.
I really love that. But I am addicted to old 60s French films that he's probably ripping off there. So
that is probably true. It just I don't mind Tarantino. There's a lot of Tarantino I like, but the Hateful Eight just really rub me up the wrong way.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to do a voiceover, try and do it from beginning to end, not just the. But this, of course, is reportage, so there has to be a voiceover there, and that does offer the audience a sort of guiding hand. It's sort of a very easy shorthand way of saying this is what's happening. This is what he did next. This is what as if it is a news report. But like you say, it is very much a film that goes keep up. Try and spot what. Again, it's like I said about the photos of him. You might not spot it in the first go, or it might linger in the back of your head 20 minutes in. Go, oh yeah, he looked a bit awkward previously. But it is expecting a degree of intelligence from the viewer, which doesn't always.
It can go wrong. It can go wrong. Yeah. I think.
And again, if you're making a film at the height of the 60s. And you go, this is a film about music and fashion and where Britain is today. And it's got that pop star that you like, who's just left Manfred Mann. You are going to expect a sort of swinging caper.
Yeah.
And sit down and expect that and then get shown something completely differently. It might turn you off. You might be like, oh, I can't understand this. And you walk out in droves.
Because Manfred Mann were not, now this is going slightly forward in time, but if someone like Bowie appeared in a film like this, you could say, I see what he's doing. You can see references to this in his work. You can see it in like Quicksand or Station to Station, that he's playing with the same themes here. But I don't want to say Paul Jones was like a blank canvas. I'm sure he understood what Watkins wanted of him, but the fact that Manfred Mann were not, one of the artistic avant-garde. They were a blues rock band who had some catchy songs. There was no reason to suspect that Jones might have had something like this in him. That sort of makes it more resonant, I think.
It does. I think it's twofold, isn't it? I think I can understand the reason why Jones wanted to do it. He just left Manfred Mann because he said that the stress and pressure of that degree of fame was too much for him. So obviously you get a script like this and it's a troubled rock star who is struggling under stress and pressure of fame. That's going to strike a chord with him. He's going to say, oh yeah, go on, that's something I understand. I can bring some of that, my own personal experience, to this performance. Quite why you pick Paul Jones to play the role, again, I think goes back to what I said earlier about the fact that he will be able to sell that slightly asexual, non-threatening transformation, where he becomes, for much of for the bulk of the film, he's the good boy, isn't he? He's the altar boy, he's the singing altar boy sort of thing. So he can sell that bit. I think that's why they'll cast him there. You couldn't cast Mick Jagger.
I think if you cast
in a role like
who had played with these themes in their music, it would just be too much of a wink at the audience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you couldn't cast Cliff Richard because, again, it's too obvious, and there's no way he'd touch it with a barge pole, because he would say, it was unfair to the church in this country and people's religious practices. Again, like you said before about the rank organization finding it immoral, which is just that's thrown me, that really.
Because it's like my disc of it has a 15 certificate, but I can't remember whether that's because the actual film or it has some of Watkins's war-themed shorts. The Forgotten
There's a
Faces,
very good
Unknown Soldier on it.
Yeah, the Unknown Soldier one, and there's one about, is it Faces?
Forgotten Faces,
Forgotten Faces, which is the Hungarian uprising, which is very sort of like shot on the hoof around. Is it around London? I think they shot it, and it sort of, it looks it's a really interesting little short film there, because I mean, you're asking people to pretend they're in newsreel footage, and it's clearly not in Hungary because it's just a small film made in Britain, but you can believe it completely. It's interesting, that one.
So I think that the 15th certificate must be because of them, because there is no space in Stephen Shorter's life for sex and drugs. Even the rock and roll becomes questionable after a while.
I mean, it's like you said before, and I hadn't thought of it, that perhaps the whole backstory of his some sort of aggressive criminal past was just a fabrication to sort of get him on the radar of a young audience immediately, and to not have him step out of the ranks of his fellow rock and roll musicians by being dead straight from the off, that it is some sort of fabrication, perhaps. But that's dispensed with almost immediately, because then we're on like, well, this is the tactic we've got for Stephen's. The next stage in Stephen's career is to be Christian and to be a figurehead and a role model. So really, if they say something's immoral, it's immoral to suggest that we're all being manipulated.
And, the fact that the film was effectively banned, that no one came out and said it was banned like they did with the War Game, but when the big cinema chains are refusing to show it on moral grounds, you have to call that kind of a ban. That does prove Watkins's point pretty effectively about what this new craze of beat music is really masking.
It's a film that it's so prophetic. It's so relevant. I mean, when I watched it 10 years ago, I mean, we were at not the height of the Simon Cowell sort of media manipulation.
But it was very strong back then.
It was, I mean, we still had X Factor, Britain's Got Talent, all those kind of things. We're still full on, and it was sort of like, well, they would guarantee they'll get, attention and acclaim. If you've appeared on Britain's Got Talent, that's it. You're set up, aren't you? Kind of thing. So that was very much there, and that is all in this film, really, isn't it? It's a film about sheep and shepherds, really, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
The Lord is our shepherd.
Of course.
I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah.
But it's interesting because when we've watched 60s rock films, even if we just take the episodes that we've done together, we've often observed that there is more cynicism in them than you would expect from a film that is trying to exploit a big teenage craze. But I think with Peter Watkins and with Peter Whitehead's films as well, you see the limits of that. People are happy for the Beatles and the Dave Clark Five to make little satirical jabs at themselves in their movies. That's fine. That's great. The sort of systemic criticism that a film like Privilege or Peter Whitehead's The Fall is aiming for is very hard for people to listen to.
This is an interesting one because I think we've I'm going to say two sort of polar opposites now, and I think that this is a sort of middle ground. And the interesting one is that me and you have on this podcast have tackled all three of these. It's the Dave Clark 5 film,
Yeah.
whose name escapes me now. What was that one called?
Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah. There's that. Then there's this in the middle ground, and then on the other end is Jubilee.
Yeah,
because that's when it gets all dystopic and quite intriguing. So and sort of like alternate Britain. I could easily see if we were saying that this is sort of like the same world that V for Vendetta is in. I could easily see Privilege so many years on being Jarman's Jubilee.
Yeah, that's good actually. Yeah, I like that. I suppose the difference is that there's a level of criticism of something new that is actually quite helpful to whatever phenomenon it is. If someone in the 60s says, I hate rock and roll because it's noisy and it's loud and uncouth, that's great. The rock industry loves that. That's what they want.
Yeah.
If you have something saying, I don't like rock music because I think it is fundamentally masking a democratic deficit in society, because I think it's bread and circuses. Like Whitehead, who I mentioned a bit back, Peter Whitehead, literally thought that Swinging London was a CIA plot, that the CIA had realized that there was this groundswell of rebellion in a massively expanded teenage generation thanks to the baby boom, and they wanted to funnel that hunger for change into, you know, what records do you listen to, what shoes are you wearing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But you can't make that into a saleable film, you know, in the way that you can with some of the other complaints about rock. That's the problem with it. It's more interesting, but it's hard to market.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's a film, and then you always run the risk of are you just singing to the choir? It's you preaching to the converted, because if you're on that wavelength, then brilliant. But you're already on that wavelength.
Yeah.
What you need to do is to try and distract the sheep, don't you? You need the sheep to understand the message, and sometimes that message is just too successful to sort of like pull them away from.
And I think Watkins, you know, could have got the message to a broader audience by making more conventional films. But as we said earlier, he thought the structure of conventional films, like the style and the look and the plot structure they had, was part of the ideological problem he had with them.
Yeah. And I mean, there's nowhere to go from there, is there? Because you're either prostituting yourself to make films that will find an audience, then maybe you can take that audience with you. But obviously he wasn't prepared to do that. It's like, well, it's, you know, you're either on board with me straight away or not, because I'm not about to sell my vision when I'm criticizing the very thing that, that's interesting. Yeah. But again, you run the risk of like, you're not turning anybody on. You just already finding people who have twigged that sort of sentiment.
But in the long run, you'd have to say it worked out. I mean, I'm sure there are films that were commercially more successful than Privilege at the same time that are not as well remembered now. It has lasted.
No, that's true.
It does have this gorgeous BFI Blu-ray edition. People are still talking about it. So, you know, for all he didn't change the course of the 60s as maybe he wanted to, he had the last laugh. These films do hold up, I think.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. I mean, I had a look at his my letterbox stats before, and he's such a big hitter with how I've rated him. They're usually about 5 stars, 4 stars.
Yeah.
You know, like I say, I've not seen a huge amount of his work, but what I have seen, I've rated incredibly well. You know, I've not been disappointed. I mean, I have seen some reviews on Punishment Park that are like 2 stars. I'm like, what are you thinking? You know, so it does it clearly resonates with me, is what I'm saying. It's clearly one that resonates with me. But having said that, I mean, I've slightly going to contradict myself now, which is weird. It's like a doorknob comment, and it would look like we're about to wrap up, and I'm like, yeah, hang on a minute. But yeah, it's it's no, because I'm sure if somebody would have seen the War Game, they would have reconsidered where they stand when it comes to something about nuclear war. I mean, I watched Threads is the film that made me join CND.
Yeah.
No, that was the clincher for me. I mean, not like, yeah, I think we should have it. I'm not saying there's people out there going, yes, I think we should have a nuclear war, because, well, I hope there isn't. Although currently people saying, let's get rid of let's have a no-fly zone. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Do you know the weirdest theory I've heard about that? And it's one that I do quite like, is that Zelenskyy, so somebody has said, I've seen said, Zelenskyy is asking for a no-fly zone because he realizes it's unreasonable. So when he comes back to the table, like asking for the actual things he wants support with, people will be more ready to give him to them. And I thought, oh, fucking hell, yeah, because he used to be a comedian, and that's how comedians get everything through. You get your offensive sketch that you love through by making a super offensive sketch that you don't mind if they cut.
It's a Johnny Speight thing again, which
is
weird. It's you can have 6 bloodies.
Yeah.
I'll let you have the Christ, but you've got to get rid of the fuck or whatever that's in his script, isn't it? It's that way of bartering. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I do. It is weird. We're going to get a bit topical there, but it is.
We're probably going to have to cut this out because it'll be like non-topical, or because the world will have ended. So we might as well say it. Yeah,
that is true. Yeah, I'm trying to think what the thing would be. I remember when O.J. Simpson was on trial for murder in the 90s, and our English teacher, who never seemed to teach his English, great man, Stephen Wells, we would have whole lessons about the Troubles, and I'm like, we're not reading anything about Ireland, but he would just tell you about the Troubles. Then we had whole lessons talking about O.J. Simpson. One lesson was just talking about the episode of Cracker, To Be a Somebody.
Wow.
It's like, how good was Cracker last night? And we just talked about that for an hour, But I remember O.J. Simpson, he says, always think about what, because over there could be a weird, strange place. I always try and think of it on like contemporary grounds over here. So imagine John Barnes has just been arrested for murder, You're like, all right, okay, yeah. So I'm trying to do that now with Zelenskyy. It's like, imagine if Rory Bremner's your president all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And that's just, I don't even want to consider that,
Or would it be like, because he was in that political sitcom, would it be like having Peter Capaldi as prime minister?
Yeah, could be, yeah. Or Chris Addison. Oh, Jesus. Heaven help us.
It is one of those things, though, isn't it? Where when this started, I remember a lot of people on Twitter were saying, oh, which British comedian would you want as your prime minister? And you thought, have we not learned our fucking lesson about this?
We had one, that's it. It's the fucking rancid, rapey bag of custard that we've currently got. Jesus.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, we may cut this, listeners, viewers, because it may not be topical anymore. We may be living in Peter Watkins' War Game as opposed to privilege. But yeah, the point still stands. I think I don't think anybody's pro-nuclear war, but I think they're pro-nuclear weapons. But I think films like War Game and Threads make you reconsider nuclear weapons. And that's what I certainly took from Threads.
Yeah.
And I do remember seeing War Game when it was finally lifted. Was it about 1985 was War Game finally
shown? That sounds about right. Yeah, it was a decades-long ban. I remember that.
See, this is how fucked up my family were. I'm like 6 years old, and my dad decides he wants to watch War Game on BBC Two one night, and I had to sit and watch it with him. It's a way to frighten the life. This is why I am what I am, unfortunately.
Yes.
You know that go-to phrase everybody says when you say the unthinkable, or you say the thing that's made everybody go, "Ooh," and you go, "I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm like this." I do know why I'm like this. But yeah, that's yeah, I think there are films. Don't be put off, is what I'm trying to say. Don't be thinking, oh no, I've got to be off a certain mindset to watch these films. Even
Yeah.
though I've just said that it will click with people who are on that mindset. I do still think that these are films with great merit that make you think.
Well, I think what we're talking about is the difference between whether
because I think I've got myself in a bit of a
you talk about
a tangle.
Yeah, I think it is hard to market these films or to people of a different mindset. But I think the films themselves, if you sit down and watch them, are incredibly persuasive and interesting. And I think that's one of the reasons why the primary reason why the war game was banned, because the BBC at that time had an astonishing chunk of the viewing public.
Yeah.
You know, for many people, there would not be anything else on television they'd be interested in watching. So they might watch this thing, and as a sort of semi-captive audience, they would be swept along with it because it is a very good piece of filmmaking.
I mean, we forget, don't we, that you're talking about 20 million viewers.
Yeah,
would have sat and watched that night if it went out. Even in the 80s on a BBC Two, you'd be looking at 7 million viewers, 8 million viewers.
I mean, there's
programs
nothing like it now.
No, programs like Strictly Now would be lucky to get 6 million viewers, and that's like the big flagship BBC program. It's just the way that the landscape has changed completely. It's so fascinating. But you were just in the 60s. If that went out in the 60s, you've only got BBC One, ITV, potentially BBC Two had just started.
Yeah, I was just trying to remember.
Channels.
Yeah, had BBC Two started at this point? I don't know.
You've only really got 3 channels.
Yeah.
That's you can divvy that up at like 20 million watching BBC One, 20 million watching ITV, 20 million watching BBC Two, and that just about makes up the population of the country, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like shit. It's going back to Harold Wilson. Bloody hell! Christ, Bernie, have a look at this. It's shit. Don't let them know that's what happens if we have a nuclear war. Because everybody will be slitting the wrist straight away.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is then we saw 20 years later when things finally relaxed and that could be shown. But it was being shown alongside Threads and Raymond Briggs' When the Wind Blows, which is a brilliant dissection of the propaganda that a certain generation believed in or was fed regarding war, literally just skewered in one film. That there are no survivors. You can't just paint your windows white and sit under a table and wait till it all blows over. It's but that at the time when things were really hot in the 60s, that was just, you just couldn't contemplate saying, no, it's game over. If this happens, it's game over.
Yeah, because we just had, the Cuban Missile Crisis was just 2 or 3 years in the past.
Exactly, yeah.
And that was done, I mean, that scared a lot of people, but it was still done on this level where people were discussing it, and in terms of, is there going to be a nuclear war? And you think, well, no. I mean, there might be some nuclear explosions, but I think it would be optimistic to say we'll get as far as a war.
Yeah. It's still a phrase that gets used, though, isn't it? Nuclear war, as if, like you say, as if it's a story of 2 combatants and a period of time. A period of time is what, 4 minutes if you're lucky.
Oh man, now I'm just remembering that great Beyond the Fringe line where Peter Cook as Harold Macmillan has to defend the 4-minute warning. He said, some people who think this is not enough time to prepare for a nuclear attack, but I will remind you there are some people in this great country of ours who could run a mile in 4 minutes.
Which is the kind of shit Johnson would say now as well, isn't it? Just pull it back to England, prevail onward. It's just bullshit, isn't it? Yeah.
Are you aware that this whole war is about pronouns, by the way? I feel like there's been about 3 government ministers who made that fairly central to their messaging, that the war is fundamentally about pronouns.
Yeah, let's trust this. The war in Ukraine will put an end to pronouns and statues.
I would like to think so, Liz, but you're still going to be fucking talking at the end of it.
Ridiculous, isn't it? And then the other story that we were just saying in about 4 minutes, we apparently don't have a warning system.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, apparently we don't have a warning system. Don't know what happened there. Perhaps it's like a Netflix subscription. We just let it lapse or something.
Perhaps they sold it to Capita. Maybe that's it.
Perhaps it was the Big Ben bongs. There was going to be a different bong, and now that they're still working on Big Ben, we're fucked.
I'm at a stage.
That's a really big thing.
Cheerful nihilism about this. Like, we're doomed, and I'm laughing. What can you do?
Else.
I don't know.
Nothing else to do, isn't it? Nothing else to do. Well, you could piss yourself like that woman in Threads.
Oh, don't worry, I'm planning to.
So I'm definitely doing that. That reminds me of a wonderful sketch in Not the 9 O'Clock News with Richard Davis, the Welsh actor who was in Delta and the Bannerman. He runs the holiday camp. Yeah. And he's playing like a Welsh Labour MP, and they're doing question time. And then they get the 4-minute warning through, and they go, "Oh, so they've launched the missiles. We go over to you. What's his opinion?" As if you'd have to come up with something on the spot. And he goes, "At times like this, I often think, what would Nigel Bevan do? And I'm fairly certain he'd have shat his pants."
Well, I think before this becomes even more of us just quoting our favourite comedy lines at each other, we should wrap up for this week.
Very possibly.
Listeners, if you've enjoyed this, you can get exclusive bonus episodes at our Patreon, including ones with you, Mark, on viewing Jerry by Molly Deneen and Crock of Gold by Julian Temple. Some great stuff there. Yeah,
they're good.
But until
I'm like Stephen Shorter trying to sell something. I've got nothing, and just sort of look pained in the pitch and just go,
apples are good, aren't they, Mark?
You're all right, yeah.
Like apples. Yeah. But until next week, that's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
And I've been Mark, and it's been a privilege. Hey. That's what you come to me for. Isn't it?